Keeping up with security issues across thousands of web assets without the right approach to web application security is a daunting task. Get ahead with web vulnerability scanning automation from NetSparker, a leader in dynamic and interactive application security testing known for its ease of use and accurate results. Detect a wide range of vulnerabilities in all legacy and modern web applications, address security bugs at scale by automating the confirmation process, automatically prioritize vulnerabilities, and assign actionable tickets to the right developers in their native workflows for rapid remediation. For more information on how to scale application security with ease, visit securityweekly.com/NetSparker. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Throughout 2022, CRA's Business Intelligence Unit will be releasing research reports on the top topics across the security industry. Our first report will be on third-party risk and the supply chain. To participate in the survey, please visit securityweekly.com/third-party risk, all spelled out. The results will be shared at our third-party risk e-summit in January. Derek Rook is the Senior Director of Purple Team at Teradata, an industry veteran and passionate educator. Derek is constantly working on new community education and outreach projects and joins us today to talk about CTFs and computer fundamentals. Derek, welcome to the show.
Hey, Paul. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
Did I say that right? Is it Rook or Rook?
I pronounce it Rook. I'm sure at some point in history it was Rook, but right. Yeah, I think it's just like the chess piece or the bird.
That's very nice.
Paul pronounces it, chances are
it's wrong.
Wrong.
Almost definitely
Language
wrong.
is a living thing. It's fine.
But yes.
Paul, how do you pronounce it this way? That
Paul.
means it's the other way.
Right. So, Derek, now that I don't have to pronounce your last name, hopefully for the rest of the show, how did you get your start in information security?
Oh, man, we were just talking during the break about sneakers. And so that was kind of the first time I saw that movie. I was playing computer games out of my house and learning about, computer servers by making game servers and things like that. And I saw that movie and I was like, well, that's a job. Like I was kind of a miscreant at the time. So, I was like, well, you can get paid for that and not go to jail. That sounds wonderful. So once I got into IT, I just kind of took the most meandering path I could possibly get to get into security and then eventually offensive security. I was in IT for about 15 years because, most companies in the early 2000s didn't have their own security teams, just like kind of the Fortune 50, Fortune 100. And then, just through a series of chance luck, I was able to get into security programs.
Awesome. Yeah. And so, Derek, it's interesting. Your journey of meandering through IT means you weren't always necessarily had like security in your title, right?
Oh, up until I think it was probably about 7 years ago now was my first security title. I had been a web developer. I'd been a systems admin, systems engineer. My first security work though was probably close to 10 years ago. I was running like vulnerability management for a large retail company.
It's interesting how when we talk
I hear
about
PCI.
When you say that, Jeff hears PCI. Before we get to PCI, though, journeys into cybersecurity, and we were just talking on the previous segment, and I think to be a really good pen tester, someone who is finding all those flaws that they can and reporting on them, that having done these legitimate, I don't want to say the pen testing is not legitimate, so that's not the right choice of words, right? But you have to hold roles in technology, perhaps outside of security before you get there. And I'm starting to build this kind of like path of you got to understand like how stuff works, the protocols, the applications and such, operating systems, and then understand how stuff is built and get stuff to work. Then you can start to understand how to defend it, and then you can start to understand how to attack it. Is that? I think you and I talked about this. Did I miss something?
I think you missed a step somewhere. We can argue where it goes, but how to break it. Not necessarily exploit it.
Breaking. Yeah. I agree, Jeff.
I think that's in line with learning how to build it, right? So when kind of what got me into security, what broke me into security was I was in systems engineering, I think for the retail company. I think they're the ones that sent me. I was fortunate enough to go to a SANS class, and I participated in NetWars at the time, and got second place in NetWars, like my first time out. And that was the first time I had done security anything, offensive security anything. And then my first year of being a security person, I got sent to another SANS class, and I went to NetWars, won that one. Got to go to Tournament of Champions, got on a team, and we took first place in Tournament of Champions as well. And so I think I'd say that not to brag. I mean, it's kind of a brag. It was pretty cool, but I say that to highlight the fact that I did not have a lot of security training at the time, and I certainly didn't have a lot of offensive security training. And it was the systems engineering that I had of like building and then accidentally breaking, and taking shortcuts, and then that getting hacked and having to remediate that problem, and all of those things.
Breaking, right?
Yeah. So because I was a systems admin, I knew the types of shortcuts that I took and the types of shortcuts that were attractive to take, and I knew what those meant. I didn't have to go, well, how do I exploit this thing? I say, oh, well, that the permissions there are 777. I can execute that. I can overwrite it. I can trick somebody else into executing it, kind of stuff. So knowing how to use computers is by far the first step to being able to hack anything, for sure.
And I agree, Derek, that building something and breaking something often go hand in hand, because you've probably like broken it or configured it so it's not working while you're building it. But then once it's built, inevitably it breaks and you got to fix it.
Yeah. Like so I'm a Linux guy. I know a lot of people in offensive security are Windows folks, but I'm a Linux person because I was a Linux admin forever. And the stuff I learned the most was like trying to make Gentoo work after a stage 2 install, and like it's breaking my sound drivers and what's that?
It's fun, isn't it? Gentoo.
I learned so much.
Yes,
I learned so much, but like needing to get your audio drivers to work.
Everybody says that's not insane. I mean, let's be clear. You go into Gentoo and you're either like, I learned so much, or you're like, it haunts me to this day.
Yeah.
Or both. I think both is an acceptable answer there.
Porque lo nos dos. Yeah, exactly. I mean,
What Linux systems, and did you start with Unix systems or Linux, or which ones you start with?
No. So my first introduction to Linux, I was working in a software etc. store, which is like a proto GameStop for the younger folks in the audience. And we had not just computer games, but also PC hardware. And so I mostly focused on selling that. And we got Maximum Linux or Linux Mag, or one of those really early Linux magazines. And it came with a Slackware disc.
What's a magazine? What's a mag?
What's a magazine? It's like a PDF that somebody
like a book with a lot of pictures
together.
Okay.
But so I installed Slackware, but I thought I was cool by saying I was a Unix person, because I knew Linux, and I was like, Linux is roughly based on Unix. It's fine, until I used my first HPUC system like a few years later, professional.
Different ball of wax.
Yeah. I'm a Linux guy for sure. Definitely not a Unix guy. I messed around with BSD a little bit. I don't mind that as much, but.
Well, it's funny, on our Discord server, we were talking about, what was your first Linux platform? And I started on Slackware, so we've got that in common.
Nice.
As well as being in one of the Tribe of Hackers books together, right?
Tribe of Hackers?
What's that?
It's a nice background you got there.
Well, thank you. I have a couple comments just before we get too deep into it, just based on your introduction and your background. Dave Kennedy tweeted in the last couple of days. He obviously had a bad day or something, and he had some kind of grumbly tweet about, it's 2021 and people still don't understand what the difference is between penetration testing and red teaming. And I think he did it on Friday. And one of the comments that somebody made to his post, of course, everybody was like, "Oh yeah, it's great." Somebody actually said, "Well, could you define it?" Which I thought was a positive step. But somebody said something about, "Well, this industry is at most 20 years old, so cut us some slack." I forget where they were going with that, but I'm like, "Oh my God, Sneakers. It came out in '93, and it's sort of the model for most pen testing companies' methodology to this day. I thought that was kind of funny. I'd throw that out there.
Blind guy drive across the parking lot.
That's exactly.
That was such a great scene.
It was.
You know, but like that's not to say that the industry didn't have people working in offensive security prior than 20 years ago, but really as a formalized industry, I agree with that. Like 2000, there weren't a lot of security teams.
Wait. Okay, stop. Let's define formalized.
Them's fighting words.
Because,
well, okay. Sure, let's go down a rabbit hole. We could do that if you want.
You know, you want to talk about PTES or, you know, Dave Kennedy's and his oh God, he just put out the new edition of what's it called?
Oh yeah, they do have they have a thing.
The pen tester's handbook or whatever.
The framework, right?
Yeah, it's a framework.
The framework.
Yeah.
The framework, pen tester's framework, yeah. And
but what's formalized? Is formalized mean we have a standard? Or is formalized it's in use in some organized fashion? Maybe I date red teaming. I don't know how far back can you date red teaming? I dated back to World War II. Was the earliest reference that I've seen it.
Well, there's a difference between red teaming, the use of the term, and co-opting it for what some people might call pen testing. And I mean, you know, when I did finally respond to Dave on his Twitter post, is like, you know, part of the problem is what you call pen testing or red teaming. I've literally had conversations where people define the term either one, and it's exactly the definition that somebody else has used to define the other term. So there is no standardization, and maybe it would behoove us to just, for the purposes of our conversation here, just define what we're talking about when we say pen testing at some high level.
So I'll date it. Maybe it'll help to date it back to World War II in, I believe it was Arlington Hall, where largely female code breakers were working during the war. They commissioned, they being the U.S. government, I forget which branch or whatever, but they commissioned a team of people to try to get into the buildings at Arlington Hall to be able to, and their goal was to collect anything that was related to the codes being broken, any sensitive information. They were, by chance, in case you're wondering, wildly successful. They were able to get into the building. They were able to get secrets. They were able to get into certain areas and report that physical security needed to be improved. To me, in the way I listened to that, that was the book Code Girls. When I listened to that in that book, to me, that was one of the first instances that I think fits the definition, although however loosely you want to define red teaming, but I thought it fit the definition.
You know, I'm gonna like, hell, screw it. I'm throwing a curveball. And I'm sorry, Derek. Yeah, we are going down a really big rabbit hole. But
it's all good.
I mean, back in the Civil War, they started actually go back to the Revolutionary War. You know, and I'm throwing historical references out, so forgive me. But go back to the Revolutionary War. The English soldiers.
Jeff remembers incorrectly. He was there. He was there for most of that. Yep.
So the English soldiers lined up in lines because you lined up on a battlefield and volley fired at each other. And, you know, whoever had the most men drop was the loser. And that was how you determined winner and loser. It was on an open plain battlefield, you know, that kind of thing. And the colonists were like, screw this. And they hid behind trees and sniped. And they actually got yelled at. They literally got yelled at by British officers going, "That's unmanly. You don't aim for the officers. We're above this." And then somebody blew his head off. And... And it was like, well, guess what? You're wrong. So, I mean, but is that's breaking the rules in order to win. And in a sense, isn't that the same idea? And so you've got Hannibal bringing the elephants over the mountain pass. You've got, you can take this idea of, it's not unintended functionality, but it's very similar, back almost thousands of years, to determine, hey, we're going to win, and we're going to figure out the way to win, even if it's outside the way of thinking that people normally use, and we're going to exploit that, and we're going to use it.
I mean, maybe in the context of hacking, Josh, I agree, but in the context of red teaming and testing. Sorry, go ahead, Derek.
Well, so yeah, I think that kind of touches on red teaming, right? Like, So if you read, I think it's called like Red Teaming: How to Succeed by Thinking Like the Enemy. They quote one of the earliest like concepts of red teaming was the Catholic Church sending out their devil's advocate. That's actually where that term comes from.
Interesting.
Because becoming a saint was so popular because it created tourism for villages. And so they started sending out an advocate to like test the theory that they had three miracles and things like that.
Yeah.
And I think the concept you're getting at is the idea that red teams function like Paul said, winning by exploiting gaps in assumptions is kind of like early hacking, but red teaming is challenging those assumptions in the first place. And that's kind of the point of that book, is that there's red teaming in military, there's red teaming in cyber, there's red teaming in legal firms, and it's all about taking common assumptions and turning them on their heads and saying, yeah, but what if that's not actually true? Can we manipulate that in a way that would be damaging or advantageous or whatever? And when I tend to talk to non-cyber people, that's how I describe red teaming to them. And it's how I talk to my red team as well, is like, look, we're doing computery stuff today, but 3 months from now, we may be like looking at the risk register and saying, well, this risk is non-technical, but what happens if this were to happen? And start working with the risk officers to war game that out. Is absolutely part of what I consider red teaming today.
So what I'm hearing you're saying, and if anybody, I need to go this way. If anybody hasn't read the book Tribe of Hackers Red Team, one of the questions that everybody that is a contributor to that book answers is, something to the effect of, what is the difference between a pen test and a red team exercise? What I'm hearing you say is a red team exercise at some level is, testing your assumptions, testing your defenses, testing whatever it is that you've set up that you think isn't permeable to attack or to compromise or breach.
I would say that function of challenging assumptions formulates the foundation of exercises. The way I specifically define like a red team exercise versus a pen test exercise is that pen testing is generally testing and measuring technical controls that are in place and the effectiveness of their mitigation or prevention and things like that. Whereas red team is generally testing people controls, process controls, and things like that. My red team finds vulnerabilities. I'm sorry?
Yeah, I like that.
That's a fascinating distinction. Yeah. I like that distinction. That's really interesting. I like that, Derek. Thank you.
I will say, I know Jeff's in the chat here. I will say that that's a modified version of something I heard Jeff say a while ago. So I don't get to claim that fully responsible, but I have been exercising that for the past several years. So thanks, Jeff McJunkin.
Well, I mean, it's helpful, because I started doing pen testing almost 30 years ago, and we called it ethical hacking, pen testing. I'm not even sure exactly when we called it pen testing, but later on, the team that I was part of was referred to as the first NSA Red Team. We did not call ourselves that, but we were absolutely testing the assumptions and going beyond technical controls.
Were you on eligible receiver?
Oh, good question. Good question, Derek.
That is a very good question. The short answer is no. I predated eligible receiver. Eligible receiver by design was
used
the
all
B
Jeff
team.
scripts.
Well, it was the B team. They part of the stated purpose of eligible receiver, which was for our listener audiences, the first joint base. Well, we would have called it the hack, but red teaming exercise perpetrated against the military, the entire span of the military. It was in 1997. I left NSA in 1996. So, the first red team was not a part of it. The people that we trained, the people that were coming up as quote unquote the B team. And that was part of the stated purpose was we don't want our uber elite people going after this. We want the more typical, we called them script kiddies back in those days, the people that are just sort of picking up exploits and maybe a few techniques in here and there. We want them to do the eligible receiver testing exercise.
And I mean, as a note of record, if I remember correctly, the B red team was wildly successful in eligible receiver, right?
Oh yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely.
I think
I just stuck the link for the eligible receiver. That they're actually re-examining the final report in the Discord.
Interesting. Yeah, I was gonna plug the Discord. Join the Discord, get the links.
Thank you, Derek. Thank you so much.
But my point is, we didn't have the term red teaming back then. If we called it anything, we called it pen testing. And I'm an old dog, can't teach me new tricks. So every time I hear somebody talking about pen testing, in my mind, I'm thinking the full spectrum, which is more commonly considered a red teaming exercise these days, whereas pen testing has been more put in a box, as it were, and I think very often dismissed.
Is that true though?
The more I hear you guys talk though about like calling it penetration testing, penetration testing, ethical hacking, and red teaming, I don't like any of those terms.
I absolutely agree.
I don't like any of them.
But it's
at one point.
The reason I asked if that's true. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, please.
Yeah, Derek, and then Josh.
Oh, I was just going to say the reason I asked for that, if that's true, is I don't think there's been any coordinated effort by anybody to standardize those terms. I think marketing drives the change of those terms as quickly as they possibly can. As soon as one gets played out, they switch to another one of the 3 or 4 so that they can sell the upgraded coolest thing, right? Like zero trust is new again and all this stuff. I think it's driven by marketing. I don't think we're the ones that are driving that term.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's most of the terminology in our industry is really marketing buzzwords when you get down to it.
So I agree with both of you, but I think that to have some frame of reference would be useful. And so, I mean, at one point for one of my former companies, I did define some of these terms. I never really put it out there that much, but I defined them as, from VulnScan to a VulnScan plus to a penetration test, a level 1, a level 2, and a level 3. I didn't put names on them because that way they couldn't be sort of market destroyed, if that makes sense, like you're talking about, Derek.
Yeah.
But I defined them as a level 1, 2, and 3. I just defined them as a level 1, 2, and 3 pen test, and it was I don't remember anymore, but it was like, one is we're just testing applications. And I actually defined them in terms of physical security because I'm an ex-cop and it made sense to me. So like a VulnScan was looking and seeing if a window is open. A level 1 pen test is actually, will the door actually open? Okay, turn the knob, does it actually open? But don't go inside. A level 2 is step inside, but don't go for the gold, go for the safe or the whatever, the cash. And a level 3 is go all the way to the gold, grab the gold, and then exfiltrate. And that's the definition of a successful. And one of them, I think it was level 2, was also a holistic check, which isn't go and get the gold, but check every vulnerability, like step inside the door, then step out and close the door. Go to the window that was marked as open by the VulnScan. Open the window, get in the window. I can get in. Don't go for the gold, get back out. So check the entire perimeter, all the vulnerabilities, but don't go for the gold. Then there was and that kind of thing. So I actually defined those out, and people found that incredibly useful. I never published
not a bad analogy though, Josh. I like it.
It's not a bad analogy, and it's let me put the way we used to do it when I first came out into the private sector and was setting up a commercial consulting organization that was. We called it penetration testing. We called it vulnerability assessment more generically. We never called it red teaming. When I was approaching a customer and they would get in touch with us and they would say, "We want a pen test." The first question I would always ask is, what do you want us to accomplish with whatever it is that we're going to do? Do you want us to find all your vulnerabilities that are making from an internet perspective? This was usually from an external perspective. Or do you want us to find a way in and see how far you can get us to go? And that was like the first question we asked, and most of the time they said, well, we want to know what all the holes are. I said, okay, you don't really want a pen test. You want a vulnerability assessment. You want us to discover vulnerabilities. If they said, no, we want you to see if you can break in. And I had clients that did that. Then it was more of a pen testing exercise, no holds barred. We were going to try anything and everything. Now, in those days, we could have done physical security. We could have done social engineering. I mean, one of our most successful pen tests. I'm calling it that, even though that's not what the definition is these days. Back in the late 90s, was using a phishing attack. In fact, NSA had a going back, mid 90s, probably 1994, 1995. They
Jesus,
had
Jeff, you're that old?
Yeah, I'm that old. Which is why I balk at saying, "Oh, this industry is only 20 years old." I'm like, not exactly.
But you retired before the industry started. I mean,
well, what I was going to say was, we had, we could have done physical security compromising, social engineering compromise. Sometimes we would resort to a phishing type of attack. Back in those days, it was, embedding something in a document and trying to get somebody to it wasn't clicking on a link. It was opening an attachment, much more so back then. But we often didn't have to resort to that because we found other ways in. One of the most popular ways we got in back in those days in the late 90s was what now we call SQL injection. But that problem's been solved long ago, so that's just ancient.
Granted, that was the time before firewalls too. Like every server had an internet accessible IP address with no firewall.
Well, and there was a publicly reachable DNS server where it was broadcasting the entire network topology. And oh, by the way, there was no private addressing, so you could map an entire network for a target. But I mean, quite frankly, most of the time, our number one recommendation was you really should buy a firewall if you're going to be connected to the internet. I mean, that was what we did in the mid to late 90s to try to get companies some modicum of security. Back then we called it internet security. We didn't have this sexy term like cybersecurity back then.
We did, yeah.
So,
Derek, I want to change gears too, and I want to talk a little bit about CTFs because you said something earlier, and it seemed like you kind of cut your teeth in cybersecurity with a CTF. What's your thoughts on CTFs today? Which ones do you like? In general thoughts on CTFs.
So I did cut my teeth on CTFs back when I first started of that in doing like CTF type things. There were these sites called Hackets that were sort of like hack the box-ish sort of things. They had various challenges like hacker puzzles, programming puzzles. They didn't have as many like exploit this system to get in, but it was very here's a challenge, solve it using a code.
Well, and Derek, that's a good point. There's so many different types of CTFs. The one you're referring to is like I download a VM, let's say, and there's basically a series of challenges or puzzles.
Well, yeah. So this wasn't even like a VM. Like this was way before that. This was like here is a cryptogram. Paste the plain text in it, or here is a weird timekeeping device. What time is it? Kind of puzzles, but they also had a little bit of programming puzzles, and it was all just online. There was no like exploitation at all. It was just kind of like cut your teeth on Python, cut your teeth on stuff like that. But so that's when I got into kind of the hacker mindset. I think that kind of taught me that way of thinking. But then, I think the big first CTF for me was NetWars. My preference, I don't know that I have a specific type because there's like attack and defend, and then there's like King of the Hill, and then Jeopardy, and I don't know that I have a favorite type of CTF.
Can you describe the different types, Derek?
Sure. So a Jeopardy CTF is a CTF that just has a bunch of challenges on a scoreboard, and you say, oh, I want to do web applications 400. And then it's like, okay, I solved that web hacking challenge. I'm going to do web application 600, and it's slightly harder. Or I'm going to move over to cryptography, and I'm going to break some ciphers. Or I'm going to move over to Linux systems and break into Linux systems, or whatever that is. So that's kind of Jeopardy, where they don't really have a path. Then there's so King of the Hill is basically a very I'll describe attack and defend. So attack and defend is where it's kind of castle versus castle. So you've got your own systems that you need to protect, and other players have systems they need to protect, and you score points by hacking each other and keeping your systems up.
Yeah, so you're like
kind of attack and defend.
The DEF CON CTF. It's a combination of red and blue. You're both attackers and defenders on those teams.
Right. Yeah, and there's several good ones on there. If you go to is it ctftime.org, I think is the name of it. But they have, if you look up CTF time, you'll find it. But they have links to a bunch of CTFs that are running all the time. King of the Hill is a variation on attack and defend, where instead of having your own box to attack and defend, you attack one or a few boxes. And once you gain access to that,
you got to keep everyone else out.
You kick everybody else out and you defend it, and you gain points the more you've got control of it. So it's still an offense defense kind of CTF. I don't have a favorite version of that. I have a favorite design style, and that design style is real life-ish. What you'll find, I think, often is that not all CTF makers are game designers, and when they don't think about the path of their challenge, then oftentimes it becomes did you happen to read the same article as the CTF designer read? Because if you did, you're going to solve it in 2 minutes because you know exactly what to Google, or you know the exact string that you need to decode with, or whatever. But if you didn't read that article, it's like needle in a haystack kind of challenges. And I'm not a big fan of those personally. I know some people really like them.
And those are typically ones where someone sets up infrastructure and everyone's attacking the same infrastructure.
Oh, yeah. So
like
that's another big...
Is Hack in the Box that style?
So Hack the Box is that style for the most part. They crowdsource their challenge creation. So some are more puzzly than others, and then some are more real world than others, and they have a fairly good rating system for that. But if you don't pay for their like super elite version, or I don't know what they call it anymore, I think it's like VIP plus maybe.
Do they still have the game?
Then
you have to solve a hacking. You have to basically hack to get the invite. I love that about that.
Oh, they took that away. No, they took that away very recently.
Really? Actually. Oh, I love that. I
hacked
my way to the invite because I'm like, you can pull my hacker card if I can't hack my way by the first level just to get the invite.
It's a good way to ensure. So we have an enterprise account at work. I got one, and what we did is, because it's like a minimum of 10 seats, and my red team's pretty small. So we said, hey, anybody who wants to join us on our Hack the Box days, you can. But it was you have to have an account, and it was a good barrier of entry, because then we knew it wasn't just going to be us. Teaching them how to computer an hour a week. It was like, okay, well, you at least know enough that you can understand the words we're saying, and we can kind of help you from there, sort of thing. But yeah, shared infrastructure CTFs are a unique design challenge, because there's a lot of exploitation that can be volatile or destructive.
Yes. And
so any file stomping or anything that looks like it could be file stomping, people start stomping files left and right, and then it like breaks the challenge, even if it's not technically involved. So I'm a big fan of unique infrastructure CTF challenges for sure.
And that's what we were talking about, where Pentester Academy it has more of a, not so much a CTF, but individual labs where you get all your own infrastructure. You can go to the web app, cross-site scripting, and there's like 16 or more different lab exercises. In each one of those, you spin up your own environment. It's just your environment, and you've got to get the flag. I think they give you a flag in most of them. Like they say, you got to give me the contents of this file or tell me what the password or something. And those are nice because you can kind of go at your own pace, and they don't run the risk, as you've pointed out, Derek, of shared infrastructure, right? Everyone gets their own VMs that are spun up, containers actually, right, that are spun up. And I like those.
Yeah, those are the best, because as a designer, you get to explore a lot more. So for instance, the last CTF that I ran, I wasn't using unique infrastructure. I was using shared infrastructure. And so I had to do like really weird stuff for like, the stereotypical sudo challenge, where it's like, if you get this user, then you can sudo to root. But I couldn't let them sudo to root, because then they could just, break the challenges, or maybe even break out of the container or do whatever.
Or hack other players too is a concern.
Yeah. Or change the flags or anything like that. So you have to kind of like work your way around people being mean in CTFs. Like I know we're hackers.
Hackers be hacking, man, right? Like,
yeah, but come on, like you don't have to be a dick. This is a learning exercise, right? Like,
I was always
be nice to your fellow competitors.
With CTFs too, I was always the guy that, like, even though you said not to hack the scoreboard, I would always kind of try and hack the scoreboard because I thought it was fun. And then I'd get yelled at, and then I'm like, all right, I'll knock it off now. But like, I just have to do it because it's there, kind of thing. It's nerve-wracking. Don't do that. Yeah, but it's hard as a provider of the challenge to like, I'm going to put up a scoreboard, but like, please, like, don't hack the scoreboard. That's not what this challenge is. The challenge is to hack the actual stuff you're supposed to be hacking, and it's reflected in the scoreboard.
You know, when you're making a CTF, you want to make as much content as possible. And oftentimes, so when I did last year, I did B-Sides San Diego and Oklahoma City. I ran both of those.
And you did a shared infrastructure CTF that was hosted locally or in the cloud?
It was in the cloud. It was on AWS. Yeah.
I'm guessing it was probably virtual, so probably in the cloud.
Well, so last year, B-Sides San Diego was in February. So it was like right before everything kind of went on lockdown. And then Oklahoma City was virtual. Yeah.
So have you ever played the I'm sorry, go ahead. Have you ever played the B-Sides B-Sides Las Vegas CTF?
No, I never make it to B-Sides Las Vegas. I'm always like working right up until DEF CON and then bounce for DEF CON.
Yeah, no, of course. Okay, so a buddy of mine, Dichotomy, Eric, runs the B-Sides Las Vegas. He started actually at B-Sides Delaware, my conference, and he runs at the Pros versus Joe CTF.
Oh, so yeah, I've heard of that.
It's sort of similar to some of the things you were talking about, but they run a shared infrastructure, but they run it as a team-based thing. You actually have blue teams and red teams, and they professional red teamers, and they run it over multiple days. And like the first day, the red teamers actually sit back. They set up a little. The blue teamers get time to defend and build up and fix things, and then the red teamers come in and just. They attack, but nicely. They do it very blatantly and very openly.
You mean like unlike some of the CCDC competitions where they?
I was going to say it's a nicer CCDC for sure.
It's a nicer CC. It's built as a learning experience, and then the second day, and then they give the blue team time to fix everything again, and then they're like, all right, second day, red team. It's like
it's on,
and the red team just like steamrolls, like it's. Steamrolls the blue teams.
A quick aside,
silly question. If I can, sorry.
Oh, hold on. Well, I was just okay, Jeff, and then Paul.
Quick question. God, I don't even remember it now. Go ahead, Paul.
Okay, I remember mine. And it's a quick aside. We were talking about CCDC, and I wanted to pay homage to one of the great leaders in our field, Alan Paller, who passed away recently. I had the privilege of working with Alan Paller a few times in my career, very few times, but very memorable. One of those memories was I actually got to introduce Alan as a speaker at a CCDC event in Maryland. And got to thank him for everything SANS had done for me and all of his work that he had done in cybersecurity, even up to that point. And I was actually watching footage. So again, first thing I wanted to pay homage to Alan Paller, who was just an awesome individual in cybersecurity, to say the least. And I was watching the kind of documentary footage. It's like a 16-minute video from CCDC. And when they cut to the red team, I went back to feeling bad for the blue teams because in the footage you can see Raphael Mudge is one of the red team members, and I'm like, poor blue team didn't stand a chance. Mubix is in there, George is in there, like all these really good pen tester. I'm like, man, poor people didn't stand a chance.
And these are college students that have not had much practical education, right? Like if you've ever hired somebody fresh out of like a comp sci degree. They know a little bit about how computers are made, but they really don't know how to use them as much
in production.
And
right?
so
they haven't done the stuff in production.
You got to remember in CCDC, there's also either a political or a physical component. I remember one year a buddy of mine, Vlad Recompiler, was red teaming at CCDC. I think the Mid Atlantic CCDC.
Yeah, that's where I was. Mid Atlantic. Yep.
They were doing big. Yeah, that's where Mubix has been running it for a decade or something. He's awesome at this. I was the CEO at one of the MA CCDCs, and Vlad was telling me that they had cages, like literal dog cages, that medication was in, as a locked room, whatever.
Yeah, I think I remember that one. Yeah.
So he went around and put a Department of Defense grade file cabinet locks on all of them so they couldn't get at their own stuff.
Oh, man.
All right, I remembered my question.
Go ahead, Jeff.
So in the context of what we're talking about, red teaming, blue teaming in a CTF, we're talking primarily infrastructure, I'm guessing?
No, we're talking about the older definition where like blue team are the defenders and red teamers are the offensive group.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So like blue teamers are usually the people that are playing the game, and then red teamers are generally professionals or somebody that's like volunteering for the game to, oppose them.
All right. Well, so either way, and here's a wish that I have and interested in your perspective on it. I would love for, some conference somewhere someday, and maybe they've done it already. I'm not, don't claim to know what's going on every single event in the land, but it would be great to be able to, bring like your developers and the people that are setting up all this stuff that commonly get attacked in a scenario in a CTF. Wouldn't it be cool to have a CTF that's completely designed for a whole, for development teams to come in and not try to build something or write something that's not susceptible to attack and compromise, but let them try to play and try to break into things that presumably they're writing and they're coding. Wouldn't that be cool?
I like that. To segue off of that, it's a question for Derek, and I'm curious to see if you or Josh or anyone else has done this. Like, if I were to put together a team, right? Let's say maybe 3 or 4 people, and the rules of the CTF are I have to put together an application to these requirements, right? It's got to run some kind of web application, I don't know, based on Apache Tomcat or something, right? And it has to allow people to log in, and it has to allow these transactions to flow. And now I can put my team together and secure it and lock it down to the best of my team's ability with the requirements that like these pieces of functionality have to exist, and then put that up for a red team to attack and kind of structure it where you can practice from the blue team perspective how to deploy and harden an application with certain requirements, and the red team then gets to attack that. And Derek, you're saying something similar to this exists?
Well, I think the way I read into Jeff's comment is more just giving non-offensively trained people more opportunities to work through some more traditional style CTFs, which I've ran at work, a couple companies. I've also brought non-security people with me to, SANS conferences or to other conferences and done CTFs with them. And I think that is very valuable. I think the thing that you described takes a lot more work to set up.
Yeah. Requirements
and is a lot harder to do objectively. Like what either you have to have everybody turn in their applications or infrastructure ahead of time and then have the same like offensive group like attack each one, and that's just going to take a while. Or it's really hard to like balance the offensive groups to make sure that like everybody's got the same kind of skill set and expertise level.
Yeah, because they all just can't pick on the least secure application stack. Right. Yeah.
Right. So it's a little harder to set up, but it is something that I'm kind of looking into. As I build my CTF infrastructure, the idea of keeping telemetry of attacks so that you can then build the inverse of it, of like, hey, here are all the attacks and I need you to secure it, or I need you to write an application that isn't vulnerable to this or, whatnot, and build more defensively minded. I know there are blue team CTFs. I haven't seen many of them. I haven't looked at them because I'm more of an offensive person myself. But that is something that I would like to do, is take real world CTF telemetry, logging actual command line input into Elk or whatever data repository, and then utilizing that telemetry to then make like a defensive CTF.
Yeah, that'd be fun. That'd be super cool.
Go ahead. The pros versus Joe CTF. I gave them a server several years back. They do PCAPs of all their CTFs. If you want them, just ask Dichotomy for them.
Mm.
They do the PCAPs. I think they get the command entries. I'm not sure. Check.
Well, I want to expand a little bit. I've spent a lot of years, in PCI, where I'm working with segments of organizations that are not necessarily aware of the possibilities that we know exist as hackers and security professionals. And I mean, it's one of the reasons why I have a podcast, companion podcast, Security and Compliance Weekly, trying to get people that don't really understand how hackers think and what the possibilities are to think about the possibilities, but also, expose hackers and the security team to, the other side, which are the people that very often are making the budgetary decisions, the purchases decisions, the investment decisions. But the best way I could describe it, run a CTF at Black Hat and for the suits and all the people that come to Black Hat that would never dream or don't even know that there's another conference up the strip a few days later. That's what I'm going for. And my overall goal is to try to, spread knowledge, spread awareness, open people's eyes. Because, I work with customer after customer after customer, and I've been doing PCI for 17 years, that they just don't have any idea of what the possibilities are and how easy it is often to exploit the things that they take for granted are secure because they followed the manual, they followed the best practices, or they think they did. They're following the, whatever framework, whatever benchmarks they say that they should be following. But I mean, my God, I've worked with customers that, they do stock installs of, Microsoft operating systems, and they think they're good. And I'm like, not so much.
I love that, Jeff, because I think there's 3 different like happy dances that you have when you get a shell, right? The first is like you're in your own lab and you set some stuff up and you get a shell. Like there's still a happy dance there, but there's no one like defending that. When you walk into a CTF, that's your next level of happy dance because you broke into a system. Now, granted, those systems are vulnerable on purpose most of the time, and there's someone actively defending that. Then there's the third level of happy dance where you did it in a production environment and it was like a bank and you got a shell, and that's a different level of happy dance. But I think to your point, Jeff, of showing allowing everyone that works in cybersecurity to have the opportunity to participate in a CTF that's tuned to their level is an important exercise.
I will tell you this. So I spent a bit of time teaching SANS 504, which is ostensibly the incident handling class, but it's a very purple class, and it has this distinction of being on some DoD like progression chart. So if you want to like get a raise on the DoD, you have to take this class as one of your classes. So I've taught project managers, I've taught CEOs, I've taught CTOs, I've taught aspiring hackers or aspiring SOC members,
and hopefully they all get to pop a shell on day 6.
You pop a shell on day. Well, it's been rewritten since the last time I taught it, but it was like as early as day 3. And I'll tell you this: the fact that it was part of a lab and we give you word for word what to type does not lessen the amount of glee that every single person in that class has when they get their first shell. And it's incredible. And that was one of my favorite things about teaching that class was honestly just teaching
seeing the look on
non-hackers.
I agree,
it's awesome. It's great. So that first shell, I mean, for us, for the people who are really getting into hacking and have been doing it for a while, or even the people who are actively trying to do it as a job, we kind of aspire through, like you said, those 3 tiers. The people who weren't aspiring to it, but are, kind of to Jeff's point of being like, hey, this is the danger, and you're seeing it from the other side now. They have just as much joy on that first one as we do on the third one. It's incredible to watch.
Well, and I want to interject here and suggest, and for historical context, Paul, back in the day, we called it the root dance, not the happy dance. Semantics. And we literally had well, I'm not going to go into
Was it an actual? Can you reenact that dance for us, Jeff?
I'm not going to do that. It's classified.
Something tells me
That's
no.
Great.
But
anytime Jeff doesn't want to answer a question, he goes, "It's classified."
It's classified. I agree with what you guys are saying, but I also, and this is where I want to educate the security hacker side of the community too. There's more to it than just your perspective. There's more to it than just getting a shell or just getting a root back in the day. There's the concept of data exfiltration. There's the concept of I'm sure this is a variation of red teaming or pen testing exercises, capturing the flag, getting to a destination. I mean, when we were doing it at NSA and we were trying to teach management that this is something we ought to be doing, one of the exercises that we did one time was the deputy director for the whole organization. He created a file and he wrote just a simple, it wasn't Word in those days, whatever it was, document, and he put it in his file folder in his directory. And the challenge was for us to get to it. And of course, we got to it and we added some commentary to this document. And then he opened it and I'm like, oh, you got to it. That wasn't popping a shell. That wasn't getting root access, but that was demonstrating we got to data that you perhaps perceive as being sensitive, and we could have stolen it or modified it or altered it, done all sorts of things. There's, to the security hacker community, I want to make sure they understand there's more to it than just popping shells. I mean, one of the arguments I used to have with my team was it's not just about getting root. It's, what do you do when you get on a box? Now we call it lateral movement, but, okay, you're here. What can you do with it? You're on a particular server, you're on a particular system or whatever. What can you do with that? What data is on it? That's where I dug in and tried to find, is there useful information on this? That's how I was able to hack a mainframe one time, because I simply found a file that had all the passwords, including the mainframe password, and I had to download a terminal emulator so I could telnet to the mainframe, Paul. And but I used the password and I was on, and I had no idea what.
Well,
to
and
do,
it was encrypted because it was EBCDIC, so.
It was encoded. It wasn't encrypted.
I know,
but there's I appreciate what everybody does and the passion and the enthusiasm that goes into most CTFs that I've seen, and I've been to a lot of conferences. But I would love to have a variation sometime that invites people that aren't accustomed to doing this type of thing, like I said, to sort of expand their horizons. But even for the regulars, try to shift the focus of the and I'm sure they're out there. Are there CTFs where there's Easter eggs? Can you get to a particular type of data? Can you get to this one particular point, and that's the goal? Not you can pop all the shells you want, but can you get to this particular data set that's in a particular place that may or may not be particularly well protected or encrypted? But can you get there? Do you even know that that's something that you should be going after and stealing? Trying to steal, because that's what companies very often worry about.
Well, I like that. Carlos Perez. I haven't talked to Carlos in a while, but his blog tagline was "Shell is just the beginning," and I think that's also a good experience for CTF players as well. Is that while you may do the happy dance or the root dance when you get that, oftentimes in a CTF, you gotta getting your flags and accomplishing your other goals is moving beyond just getting shell.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I remember, in my early private sector days, late 90s, we would tell customers, we got root on the main server. And they're like, so? I'm like, no, we're root. Don't you get it? We're root.
Right.
We knew what that meant, that everything was owned and we could do anything we wanted, but they didn't understand that and they didn't appreciate it. And we couldn't articulate that. But what was more successful is if we could, again, if there was a particular data set or a particular file system and we could get to it and say, hey, we got this, here it is, then they'd sit up and they had no idea what getting root meant or popping a shell meant, but they understood, you got to this data, that's not supposed to be out there, that's not public knowledge, how did you get there? Then they would listen.
So it's interesting that, through this entire segment, we've been talking about definitions. We've been talking about what does this mean? We've been talking about how the different types of CTFs, and some of them are articulated or described or defined. Some of them aren't. And Derek, you gave some great information on CTFs, and that was fun. Thank you. And we literally ended up with, like, back in the day, back in the dawn of pen testing, you literally had problems, when rocks were soft and dirt was young, and Jeff was a little younger, not much, but a little younger.
I had hair.
It was tough for you to explain even what you were doing and what success you were finding, because they didn't understand what you meant. So I just find that fascinating.
I remember having a customer one time where, in the early days of web application testing, of course, we did it from a shell, and we ran scripts and tools. And I remember, I won't say who the customer is, of course, but I remember very distinctly just the jaws dropping and the look of confusion when we were talking about, because they thought that they had protected the browser and had all sorts of restricted access. And we just said offhandedly, well, we don't use a browser to attack your web app. And they're like, how do you get to a web application without a browser? They have absolutely no clue. And that, hopefully more people understand that now. But that's just an example back then, and I'm sure there's contemporary examples of how customers just really don't have a clue what we're talking about and what we're doing, which would be intriguing to invite these people to some sort of tailored special CTF and let them try it for themselves and let them discover very often just how easy it is to do some of the things that we do.
Derek, speaking of CTFs, are you working on a new CTF? Anything you want to kind of tease out to our audience?
So I am. I'm going to be running B-Side San Diego's CTF again. I'm actually in the middle of building out an intro to Linux course that started out as an offensive security class that I wanted to write, and I started writing the outline for. I started writing the outline for like the fundamentals section, because like we said earlier, you can't hack unless you know how to use a computer. And that actually turned into a full blown. It's like 700 slides, so it's probably going to be like a 20 to 40 hour Linux class. So I'm building that, and that'll probably.
I don't want to put you in an awkward position, but is that going to be a free course, paid course? Like how do people get?
It's going to be a pay what you can.
Okay.
Yeah, it's going to be. It's going to have some suggested.
Then we now call the John Strand model.
I am partnering with Black Hills.
Good for you.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So awesome. Speaking of Black Hills, I'll also be keynoting along with Jeremiah Fowler. We're both going to be keynoting their Way West Hackenfest in San Diego in May.
Nice.
So that's something that if you want to come out to San Diego, which I highly recommend, it's a beautiful city. Come on out. First week of May is when that's going to happen.
And then you're still teaching for SANS?
I haven't in a while. I'm kind of on hiatus. My day job has gotten ridiculous, and I just haven't been able to make the commitment to be out of you usually teach when you teach for SAN. You teach like 6 to 8 times a year, which is like 6 to 8 weeks that you're not in the office a year, and that's not even counting like vacation and recoup time.
Right.
So,
Derek, I just have 5 questions for you. Are you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
Hell yeah, let's do it.
3 words to describe yourself.
Energetic, passionate, and the nerd.
That's what she said.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
I'm actually trained in it's the martial arts called kendo, but it's basically a practice katana that we use. So probably a katana.
A real one or a practice one?
So I can use both, or archery. I also do archery as well. So one of those two.
What kind? What style?
I use a traditional longbow, so like English longbow.
English longbow. Okay, interesting.
Historical, yeah.
If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
Rook takes bishop.
Oh, I love it. I think I know the answer to this one, but what is your favorite hacker movie?
Oh man, I said it earlier. That's cheating. It's definitely Sneakers, but
it's definitely Hackers. Yeah, it's Hackers. I get it.
Hackers is a close second. If people outside of the community think we hate Hackers,
I win this round, Paul.
Jeff and I have this long a scoreboard of who says Hackers, which is mine, and who says Sneakers, which is Jeff's.
Hackers is a very close second. Hackers is a great movie. I enjoy it and watch it often.
We'll talk about it after the show. Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive,
dead. Crap. What is it?
Fictional or otherwise?
Fictional or otherwise. Sorry.
I have no idea how these people are in real life. I don't know, man.
That's part of the fun.
Let's say Morgan Freeman and Neil Patrick Harris.
Ooh, nice.
I think
what
would
an
make good
interesting
parents.
combination, but fascinating people.
Neil Patrick Harris, like Doogie Howser, or
no, like the guy. I don't know if you're into 3D printing,
or
but
no,
he's been
Neil Patrick Harris in what's the White Castle movie?
Kumar.
Harold and Kumar.
Harold and Kumar go to White Castle. That Neil Patrick Harris.
No, like real life Neil Patrick Harris. That guy.
Real life. Okay.
Seriously, have you seen Neil Patrick Harris and what he does for Halloween with his kids?
He's amazing.
Essentially, one of the nicest people in the entire world. Like his kids are. I saw an interview of his kids once, like just a snippet, and they're so friggin' happy it's pitiful. Like it's ridiculous. He's anyway. Sorry.
He's been doing micro manufacturing a lot lately. So if you check out the YouTube channel 3D Printing Nerd, he's been doing a lot of stuff with that guy.
That's
lately.
cool. Derek, thank you so much.
Well, hold
on.
Paul, I have a quick question before you close it up.
Yeah.
It's a nerd archery question. And Derek, does the Pope and Young scoring system mean anything to you from an archery perspective?
Not that. No, I don't know that term. No.
Okay, then close it, Paul.
Wow.
Wow. All right. Hey, Derek, thanks for appearing on Paul's Security Weekly. Coming up next, the security news. Stay tuned.